Welcome to Bet On It. It is championship weekend. Kelly Stewart here, joined by Marco D'Angelo, Joe Raineri, Andy Lang, and Ralph Michaels. We're breaking down the AFC championship game. The NFC championship game going to hit the prop market with the prop shop with Andy. And of course, get all of the data from my good friend Ralph during the TNA segment. So let's get right into it. Marco, I'm going to cut the small talk, not ask you how your weekend was because, well, I don't want to bring up how mine was.
Okay, Kelly. Well, things have been going pretty good, especially this week here at Wager Talk. And I do have a special offer for our viewers today before we get into the show. You can use coupon code MARCO7. That's Marco and the number 7. And you can pick up 7 days of all access service. That's all sports. Guys, we're 7-1 as of this taping, Monday and Tuesday. Great start to the week. And over the last 17 days, 42-26 for a profit of over $3,600 in the last 17 days. Really feeling it right now. And I've got a 5% major wager going on Sunday. So check it out over at wagertalk.com.
Glad to hear one of us is running hot, Marco. I don't know if I can classify either one of my losses on Saturday or Sunday as bad beats. Obviously, Deebo Samuel going out, not great for the Niners offense, but man, that Niners defense was not good. And neither was the Bills defense, but not as bad as Stephon Diggs and Tyler Bass. So it was a painful one. But we're going to get into these games. Joe, how was your weekend? I know you like to play a lot of totals.
Well, you know me, Cal, I live with Bill's Mafia, so you can imagine what this place must have been like over the weekend. We're still replacing windows, a glass table, got to get 2 new TVs. So, yeah, things were wonderful watching that meltdown over the weekend here. So not great, Buffalo, but I do think we've got a pretty good idea on what's coming up this weekend here with the 4 remaining teams.
All right, well, I've got the Wager Talk odds screen open here. Kansas City at Baltimore, pretty much 4 at all the books in Vegas, circa Superbook, South Point. Caesars is the lone 3.5 hanging out west. A lot of offshore still sitting at 3.5. DraftKings still 3.5. So this one's interesting. I would have to say if you like the Ravens, you should probably get on them now. Marco, the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes as an underdog. I had to hear about it during this entire game last week versus the Bills. Am I going to have to hear about it all day Sunday again?
No, what you're going to hear about is, the Kansas City Chiefs are back. That one game, everything's fixed. They had their best offensive game. Patrick Mahomes hasn't lost a playoff game. That's what you're going to hear. And, let's stop for a second and pump the brakes. And, Joe, I feel bad for you with your house there with Baltimore. And, me, the kind of guy I am, I usually get yelled at if I don't maybe put dishes in the dishwasher or something. I don't know if that's just with all women, but I would have just put the dishes and I would have put them to the wide right of the dishwasher in your house. That would have went.
You're not helping, Marco. You're not helping.
Hopefully she's not watching.
Woo! Not helping.
As far as this game goes, both games, and it's similar for what we saw with San Francisco last week. Everybody wants to be the number 1 seed. You want home field advantage. You want that bye week and all of that. But in reality, what ends up happening is if you do secure the best record in the NFL and you've secured it prior to the final week of the season, which both Baltimore and San Francisco did, you rest your starters the final week of the season. So nobody plays that week. Then you've got the bye week. Well, nobody plays that week. Then you play your first playoff game in the second round, which means the main players on your team, the starters, the guys that make the engine go, have not touched a football in an active game for 20 or 21 days. And you saw both Baltimore and San Francisco come out flat as pancakes last week in first half plays. Now, that doesn't help us for this week, remembering that, but mark that down for next year if that situation happens. And Joe, I know you'd be all over it because I'm signaling a first half wager. Okay, so you can hit the bourbon, cash the ticket, and I guess it might have been a little bit of bourbon flowing in your household on Sunday night. Not helping, I know, Joe. But remember that. Now, what did we end up seeing at the end of both games? You saw Baltimore come out second half. They were a totally different team. And they were playing an overmatched Houston team that's been a great story all year. But let's face it, they were maybe 1 or 2 years ahead of schedule of making the playoffs. The other game, Green Bay, this is a team that's been a playoff team basically every year. The only difference was, well, Aaron Rodgers is gone. Jordan Love was in. And as we found out at the second half of the season, Jordan Love pretty much made a believer of all of us. Now, as far as San Francisco goes, we'll have more on that one when we break it down. But I look at this Baltimore team. They were the best team down the stretch of the season. And I know Kelly's sitting there smiling with her futures ticket on Baltimore, and she should be. This is a team that 9 of their last 11 games, and I'm throwing out the last week of the regular season because they sat everybody. This is a team that scored 31 or more points, 9 of 11 games. Kansas City, yeah, they got the offense going last week. Was it really the Kansas City offense turning the light switch on and now they're in playoff mode? Or was it the fact that they were playing a Buffalo Bills team that had a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the football? It was a Buffalo Bills team that was playing on a short week, and it was a Buffalo Bills team that until they finally beat Kansas City in a playoff game, Kansas City lives rent-free in their heads, okay? I think it's a combination of all of that. And let's not forget, you want to talk about Patrick Mahomes. You know what? When was the last time he really had something to prove? All he heard from everyone, including us, he hasn't won a playoff game on the road yet. Well, you know why? Because he hadn't played one. And that was bulletin board material for him and the rest of the team. Now they got to go out and do it a second week. I don't think so. The best teams here, they're at home. There's a reason they got home field advantage. This offense has been unstoppable. And I want to see Kansas City's offense do it 2 weeks in a row and do it against a good defense that isn't decimated by injuries. I got Baltimore. I've got them winning by 10. I made 10 the number, Kelly, because I'm leaving that out there in case you want to have some teasers, with Kansas City and get them over double digits. Still could be out there, but I like Baltimore to win and cover.
Joe, this is a tough one for me. I, of course, like the Ravens. I wore my Ravens colors. This is difficult. Do I, who is a person holding a 20-1 ticket on the Ravens, put a little bit on the Chiefs, plus 3.5, actually even 4 at this point in time, hope for a Ravens squeak out win, Chiefs cover, but also possibly hedge my futures bet in a roundabout way? What would you do?
Well, I think it really depends on how much confidence you have in Mahomes and this Kansas City team to go on the road for a second time and be able to put up enough of a fight against, let's face it, a much better defense than what they just witnessed in Buffalo, who apparently is ripping guys off of their couches to come and play linebacker for them. I mean, it was... when you throw that many passes of at least 20 or more yards, right, and you complete that many plays, there's obviously some issues with the Buffalo defense. And don't forget, I mean, they also, who else did they face? Was that the Miami Dolphins defense, who also had 9 starters out? So if you have a lot of confidence in the Kansas City offense and you think they can do exactly what they have been doing, and forget what you saw in the regular season. Obviously, Kansas City took a step back this year, but this is the playoffs, right? So all of that means nothing because it comes down to which quarterback here do you have the most faith in, Lamar, or do you have it in Mahomes, that no matter what, Mahomes is going to give you a chance to come back? And if you think nothing this defense that Baltimore can throw at Mahomes is going to matter and Mahomes is going to be Mahomes, then you better hedge something here because we don't want to have to go, oh, crap, I can't believe I didn't believe Mahomes and Kansas City can do it. I do think, in fact, though, I'm looking at the first half mostly because I don't want to watch the second half of this game. An interesting part of what we learned about Spags and this Kansas City defense, and this is by far, I think, the best defense that both of these quarterbacks have seen here in a while. But the second half adjustments for Spags this year, they've averaged only giving up 7 points in a second half. So we've seen Kansas City maybe sometimes defensively struggle in the first half, and we saw it last week. All the points, they didn't score a touchdown to any more than one touchdown in that second half, Buffalo, and ended up costing them the game, obviously with the missed field goal. But it was the adjustments. And yes, they gave up 173 yards on the ground. Are they going to give up even more yards on the ground? Possibly. It's the best running team they're going to face, this Kansas City defense. But when they get to the second half, that defense is more than good enough to make the adjustments. So whatever Harbaugh and Lamar are coming up with, I think there's going to be less scoring in this second half, which means Mahomes and Kansas City's best shot at this game is going to be keeping it close early and then see if they can hold on late and get an extra touchdown. Where I'm getting with this is I think points are coming early in this game. I think Kansas City, the adjustments will come in the second half. I think Baltimore's adjustments will come in the second half. Keep in mind, C.J. Stroud, that was a 10-10 game going into the break. They had 20 points in the first half of that game, and a little rusty for that Baltimore team. That's not going to be the case here. I think Baltimore moves the ball. I think they score. I have this as a 14-10 game going into the break. The total in the first half, 20.5, 21. I think we're getting more than that in the first half. I don't want to go full game under because it might actually be more than that in the first half, but with the adjustments coming in those two defenses, I think the highest scoring half is going to be in the first half. That's where you're going to get your points, and that's where this game is going to be decided.
And I just decided I'm not hedging. So I'm going to let my Baltimore future ticket ride. And I'm going to lay 3.5 here with the Ravens. And that is probably because I'm a glutton for punishment. Everything that Marco said in regards to this team is very true. We know Kansas City struggled throughout the regular season. It was a rough go for Chiefs fans, but I'm going to read you guys something that I just got a tweet about. Lamar Jackson today told the media, to be a champion, you've got to go through a champion. That is our mindset. I love that. And for that reason, plus a couple others, I'm going to lay 3.5 while it's still available with the Baltimore Ravens. And of course, I already have my nerd glasses on because I see Ralph Michaels waiting in the wing. It's time for some TNA. The guy with all the nerd charts at CalSportsLV on Twitter, at Ralph Michaels WT on Instagram, where you can get all of his nerd charts because, well, I post them there for Ralph. This is like our little exchange. I run his Instagram. He gives me all of the data, and he's got a lot for us this week, and not large sample sizes, but a lot. We're talking number one seeds. We have some totals mixed in. What happens if you win outright as an underdog the following week? So let's get into it, Ralph, starting off with that nerd chart.
Well, Kelly, this one was because of Teddy. Teddy reached out and said, hey, what have the number one seeds done? So I broke it into a chart simply just so you can visualize the chart. And I will say this, going back to 2015, we have two number one seeds this year. It doesn't always happen. They're 9-3 straight up. They're 8-4 against the spread. And if you're the number one seed, you've gone 7-5 over under. I will post this chart on Twitter. If you see, we're starting with 2022 on the top. You'll see 2021. I don't have any teams because neither of the number ones made it. So it lists all the number ones in the years they made it. And the number one seeds were in the blue. So you see the 9 teams that won as number one seeds. You see the 3 teams as lost. You can go to the right and you see the number one seed, which team failed to cover and they won the game. And you see that was the New England Patriots. Plus, this chart is so important because you could see the quarter by quarter scoring for each team. So if you're one that likes to play which half will be higher, first half or second half, it gives you an idea to go through and see what those number one seeds have done. So again, not a lot of data we're going to take out of it, but it allows you to update your handicapping and perhaps look at those totals or look at those sides or look at those which teams score first. I was semi-surprised, Kelly, looking at those number one seeds, first quarter last year, they both led. In 2020, one led, one trailed. In 2018, one led, one trailed. But those number one seeds have gotten out to early leads in the first quarter, as you'll see from that chart.
Yeah, 8-4 against the spread since 2015, excluding obviously the year there were no number one seeds. Interesting, but is it enough to actually warrant a play on the 2-1 seeds this week, Ralph? Especially when one of those 1 seeds looked terrible in winning last week.
Well, the other thing to remember, Kelly, is that the playoffs have changed because up until 3 years ago, we had the number 1 and number 2 seeds each getting buys. So you were playing a different level of competition. Now with the 1 seeds, it's a little bit different because you're automatically playing that lower seed versus just the bracket of the playoffs. So no, I am not going to blindly play a number 1 seed. To me, when we get to the playoffs, basically these charts mean very little to me. It's my eye test and the way I match up those 2 teams to decide what I'm going to use.
All right, let's talk about teams that were outright underdog winners last week.
Well, in the playoffs, this isn't only this round. This is in the playoffs going back to 2010. Teams that are off a win as a dog, like Kansas City, have gone 20-31, only 39% straight up. But those teams have gone 28-21, 57.1% against the spread. And when a team is off a win as a dog, they have gone 17-34. That is a 33% over-under mark or 66.7% to the under. So being off a win as a dog has been a positive, and they've gone under the total.
Interesting. I asked kind of earlier in regards to the Niners. So let's talk about teams that won but didn't cover.
Teddy Covers asked me the same question. He was looking at the Niners and wanted to know what those teams have done. Well, the teams that are off a win but failed to cover, like San Francisco, going back to 2009, have only gone 13-13 straight up, but they've gone 16-9-1 against the spread. That is 64%. And they've gone 10-15 with 1 push over under. That's 40% over under or 60% to the under. And if you won your last game but failed to cover and now you're at home, only an 11-game sample size, but those teams like the 49ers have gone 8-3 against the spread. That is 72.7%. And 3-7 over under, so 70% to the under. So be it off a win that didn't covered or off a win and didn't covered at home, we're 64-73% against the spread, and we are 40% and 30% over under, so both leaning to the under.
All right, you keep talking about these totals, but it sounds like you have some data specific to actually back it up.
Well, I only looked at totals. When I broke down the totals in categories, they all leaned to the under, but there were no wow numbers. But when I did put in totals of 50 or higher since 2012, playoff totals that are 50 or over have gone 13-22 over under. That's 37.1% over under or 62.9% to the under. So when you have a high total, they have gone under 63% of the time.
Okay, Ralph, last but not least, give us the rest of the TNA for Conference Championship Weekend.
Well, I just wanted to point this out, Kelly, that teams that win the game, I know you love playing those money line underdogs, Kelly. So what percentage of teams that win the game cover the spread? Well, looking at the 30 playoff games, the last 30 playoff games, those teams have gone 25-5 against the spread. So, you're hitting 80% against the spread. That is actually a little bit under what the NFL average is, which I think off the top of my head was 82.3 or 82.8%. So 80% of the time, the teams that win do cover. Lastly, I want to talk about teams that were down at the half and came back and won. Now, it's only a 30-game sample size going back to 2010. The Chiefs trailed the Ravens at halftime last game. Excuse me, the Chiefs trailed the Bills at halftime last game, now playing the Ravens. Those teams that trailed at halftime came back to win the game. In their next playoff game, they've gone 18-12, 60% against the spread. So there are a couple positives on the Chiefs. They came back from halftime and ended up winning the game. And those teams off a win as a dog have been positive as well. So not telling you to bet the Chiefs. Again, small sample size, especially here with the 1 seeds in the conference finals. But it gives you an idea of what has happened historically in the playoffs from some situations over the last decade.
Always some great TNA from the data daddy himself. That is Ralph Michaels. We call him the Stat Daddy sometimes too, at Cal Sports LV. If you guys have a question for him regarding the Super Bowl, make sure you send him out a message. His homepage, wt.buzz/RM. Time for these glasses to go because we're going to head over to the prop shop, see what Andy Lang's up to. There's Andy, the guy who has made me a better prop better this fall and now subsequently winter, because it was the only highlight, Andy, of my weekend. Diggs was the lone prop bet loser on Sunday, and I had thrown in a Dalton Schultz touchdown as well that killed my better lineups, but had you bet everything straight. We went 2-0 last week on the show. What do you got up at Wager Talk before we get into it?
Yeah, getting down to the end of the NFL season, but we do have our best bet. That is up at wagertalk.com, coming off another winning week in the NFL on the show, as well as client play. So looking really good, just feeling good. We're low volume in NFL, and it's been working. So we're hitting, I believe, over 63% for the last 5 weeks of the NFL season and into the playoffs. So feeling great. We're only going to have a play or two for this weekend, but we got some nice props to give out on this show.
Yeah, you asked for my best bet this weekend, and I wouldn't say either one of these is a best bet. I told you I was on the Ravens as well as the Niners as a chalk-eating weasel. And so you gave me a prop bet from each. Now, for the Ravens game, I really thought Andy Lang's going to come in with maybe a rushing prop against this defense, but you didn't. And I need to know why.
Well, because I think that's where most prop bettors are going to go, and I don't like being where everyone else is. I like to find some ones that are a little bit under the radar. So we'll start with that Ravens game, Kelly. I'm going to go Lamar Jackson, not going rushing. I'm going to go over 19.5 completions, and that's going to surprise a few people because he only had 16 completions last week, but it's ended up being a 24-point game where he did not have to complete that many passes against the Houston Texans. I believe this game is going to be very close. The line suggests it. And so we go back and look at some of these games that were close. You know, San Francisco, they beat handily, but this is a game against a big-time opponent. He completed 23 passes in that game against the Rams. That game goes to overtime. He completes 24 passes on 43 attempts. And we look back against Detroit. There's another playoff team. He completed 21. Tennessee, that was a one-score game. There's 22 completions. Against division rival Pittsburgh in a game they lost, there's 22 completions. Against the Colts, another game they lost, 22 completions. Against the Bengals, 24 completions in a 3-point game. So what we're seeing is when these Ravens are not involved in blowouts and they're playing really good teams, you're seeing Lamar have to throw the ball quite a bit. So I think this game is going to be really close. The 3.5 line suggests it. I think they have to throw a little bit more. And don't forget that, you know, Josh Allen was 26 of 39 last week, so almost 40 pass attempts, 26 completions, despite the fact that the Bills ran the ball 39 times. So you got a team that ran the ball a lot last week against this Chiefs team, but they also threw it a lot. I'll take Lamar over his completions.
I would have to agree with you there. Last week, though, Lamar rushing yards. Andy was just, it was like the most free gift from the sportsbook gods that I've ever gotten in my life. Am I dumb to go back to the well with him over rushing yards as well?
Oh, no. The books probably don't really know what to do about it. And I just kind of stayed away because I haven't really jumped on the Lamar Jackson rushing props. I mean, here's my only worry is, yeah, he did have 100 yards, but last couple games of the season, he only had 45 against San Francisco. He only had 35 against Miami. So he's kind of been hit or miss. And you're kind of guessing with some of his rushing props. But he is that guy where he does have the 100-yard game. You're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Like, well, he went under the previous
Well, I
two
did
games.
think of that, and now I want to go back to the well with it again. And that's my problem, is that I'm kind of one of those people where if it just continuously keeps hitting, CJ Stroud, you and I spoke about this, I think like week 6 or 7, and then we got to ride that train until we won by the hook. And I said, okay, maybe now is the time to jump off the CJ Stroud passing yards train. And it was a great time. So that's the only reason why I asked. Let's pivot to the late game NFC Championship, where I like the Niners. So talk to me about Brock Purdy.
I'm really surprised by this number. I'm going to go with his pass attempts at 29.5. So even in the rain, which is a game that he struggled mightily, there was all those, there's all the video of him struggling. He still threw the ball 39 times and completed 23 of them. And this ended up being a 3-point game. So again, you look at these games that are really close. We go back to the regular season against Baltimore, a game they lost. He had 32 pass attempts against division rival Seattle. He had 30 pass attempts. And remember when they went on that 3-game losing streak against Cincinnati, he had 31 pass attempts. And a loss against Minnesota, 30 pass attempps. So you're seeing him, again, when the game is close, he tends to throw the ball a lot. And I was really surprised that the San Francisco 49ers didn't have as much success as I thought they would. I mean, 24 carries for 111 yards is good, but that was against a Green Bay Packers defense that was nothing short of horrible against the run throughout the season. So rainy conditions, McCaffrey only got 17 carries last week. Not sure he's still 100% healthy. They put the ball in Brock Purdy's hands a lot. I think they're going to have to do it again because their defense, the San Francisco defense, has given up some points. They gave up 21 to Jordan Love. I think this Lions team is going to have no problems putting up points. This could be a little bit of a shootout. I'm not going to go with his yards. I'm not going to go with his completions, but I do think he throws the ball a lot. I looked at the forecast. Does not look like it's going to be rainy, so we don't have to worry about the old slippery hands Purdy in this one. I like him to get to 30 pass attempts.
Yeah, if I see Purdy trot out there with a glove again, never mind. We're just not going to get into it. He is Andy Lang. Thank you, Andy, for your contribution. And Andy and I are actually going to do a standalone prop segment for the Super Bowl once the Westgate Superbook releases their literal prop Bible. Probably plan on that being, we'll call it Friday the 3rd-ish. I'll get with Andy on the scheduling once that is released. Thank you to Andy for his contribution to, well, my prop slips, if you will, at Bump Sports over on Twitter, at Andy Lang Bets on Instagram. We're going to work on that, Andy. I gotta have it be the same. It's just my OCD kicking in. But we are going to talk about the NFC Championship game Sunday, Fox, 6:30 Eastern. Detroit is a 7-point underdog on the Wager Talk odds screen at San Francisco. The total is 51. Joe, I'm going to go to you first. I mentioned some of my disdain for the Niners and their performance against the Packers, and it was abysmal. And in fact, I tweeted that I didn't think they deserved to win that game, but they did. Maybe a little overreaction on my part. Should I be laying it this weekend with the Niners?
Yeah, it's funny. I really don't think either spread in either of these games is going to come into play. I really don't. I think that if you pick the winner, Doesn't make a difference if it's 7-6, 7.5. I just think San Francisco is going to be too much in this spot here for Detroit. Not to mean that this won't be a good game for a little while, but ultimately I do think it's going to be too much San Francisco in the end, and the ride will be over for Detroit. Now, the question is, well, what's it going to be along the way here? Are we going to get a fun one, a shootout of sorts? Because we've obviously seen Detroit do that now on a couple of occasions where that defense is just, Detroit has been winning games because they're doing all the little things right. They're converting in the red zone. six or seven, I think, so far in the playoffs here. I mean, they have been absolutely phenomenal inside the red zone. They have also done a great job with time of possession. They've also done a great job of winning the turnover battle. They've also been a great job of actually, when it matters in the fourth quarter, where they can't give the ball back to the other offense, they go on these crazy 4, 5, 6-minute drives, and they don't give the other team an ability to be able to come back and win the game. They are going to have to be even better than that, I think, in this game against the 49ers. However, a 49er defense is ugly. That is not a championship defense that we have seen. They have warts. They can be beaten. But ultimately, I think as long as Debo's going, and I think that's a whole conversation also, we got to make sure he's going to be on the field here, because we've seen now, 4 games without him on the field this year for the 49ers, and that is a totally different offense when he is not available to them. So if he is a go, the weather cooperates, which all indications are there won't be any rain or anything along those lines in this one. I don't see how we're not getting points in this game, because I don't think San Francisco is going to have a problem covering the 7. But this certainly feels like 35 is going to win this game, and it's going to be one of these 35, 24 kind of games. I don't see how this thing stays under 51. I think with that Lions defense, they're going to give it up to the 49ers. But we've already seen Detroit be more than capable against the middle-of-the-road 49ers defense. They shouldn't have any problems putting the ball in the end zone either. So I think the over, for me, is the way to look at this game.
Marco, I too could see the over being a play. Last week we saw the Niners, they needed late scores, right? And that could be a concern here for either one of these squads. Joe mentioned the defensive woes of the 49ers. What about the defensive woes of the Lions? LA and Tampa Bay had over 400 total yards each, and both had opportunities to win their respective game against the Lions. Of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Gibbs, absolute studs in their own offensive retrospects. But the Niners really do scared me without Deebo Samuel. Are you betting them, or are you waiting to see his status?
Well, full disclosure, I bet it Sunday night. I grabbed the 6.5 when it was out there here in Vegas. This is a spot where, again, as I said in the Baltimore game, Kelly, you look at what transpired, okay? This is a team that had everything wrapped up. They sat players the final week. Brock Purdy didn't play. And you know what? I don't agree with that. I think these guys need to play, even if it's only a couple series, get them into the game, get them some reps, and keep them fresh, keep them active. I talk about it during the regular season. How many times have I told you when we come up to a team's bye week, if they go into the bye week on a roll, I think that's a negative, coming out of the bye. It's a momentum stopper. If they went into the bye week and things weren't going well, that's a different story. You're using that bye week to fix the problems and you're focused. Well, they came out, they were flat as a pancake when they came out. And let's face it, that Green Bay offense has been rolling. Jordan Love, it was throwing the football all over the field. You saw what he did to the Cowboys. Now, granted, the 49er defense is much better than the Cowboys, but they still had success moving the ball early in that game. And let's talk about Brock Purdy. He was horrible in the first half of that game. I almost tweeted out on the first half because I wasn't happy. I had San Francisco in teasers, whenever it was 9.5, we used 7-point teasers, got them down under the field goal. I wanted to tweet out and say, this is a fun time for Iowa State Purdy to show up, okay? And that's the thing. Everybody is never going to let him forget that he was the last person picked in the draft. That's always going to follow him throughout his career. All right. So he had all of the pressure of the expectations from last year. Let's face it. This team feels they got, cheated out of a Super Bowl appearance because of the injury that happened in the NFC Championship game. Then what happens early in this game? They start out flat because, the starters hasn't played for 3 weeks. Then you got Deebo Samuel goes out of the game. If you're Brock Purdy, you got to be having flashbacks to your injury from last year. And now all of a sudden you got to be the man, and he wasn't doing it. But the fact that they got it together in the second half, the drive they needed in the fourth quarter, yes, Christian McCaffrey was a huge part of that. But Brock Purdy connected on 6 of 7 passes in that drive that also opened up the running game. And that was such a confidence builder. I love to take a good team that had a major scare, and you can't have any more of a scare than they had last week against the Packers. Did the Packers outplay them? Absolutely. Should the Packers have won that game? Absolutely, I agree. But they didn't. It's San Francisco that's moving on. They're playing with house money, and now all of those nervousness, rust, you always hear that saying, rest versus rust. All of that's out of the equation now. They can play. They won a game they shouldn't have, and that's what sparks teams to go on rolls. And let's look at Detroit. It's been a great story, but you know what? Eventually the clock's got to strike midnight for Cinderella, and that's where it goes this week. I look at that defense of Detroit, and we go backwards. Kelly, you mentioned Tampa Bay and the Rams having 400 yards plus against them. I'm looking at the passing yards. You had Baker Mayfield last week, 319, 357 for Matthew Stafford the week before that. Minnesota, Nick freaking Mullins, come on. They threw for 359. Dak had over 300. In Minnesota, in the first meeting, had 374. It's a spot where I just don't trust the Lions defense. They're not playing at home in the friendly confines. Not that weather's going to be a difference. It's just the environment. You're playing at home. You've got the crowd. You're not going to have that. And let's not forget one other factor. Jared Goff's had a great run, and Detroit has been the perfect fit for him. But tell me he's not going to go into that stadium on Sunday and look across the line of scrimmage and see the San Francisco 49ers and have flashbacks of when he was with the Rams. The 49ers always played the Rams tough. I'm on San Francisco. Sorry. I got them winning this one by double digits. I'm laying the 7.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had an opportunity to tease San Francisco this week, but that's going to be okay. I don't know if I fully trust this team, but Marco, you made a lot of sense, and I trust your handicap. All right, guys, there's no best bets this week because we gave you both of our bets for both games, and I'm a chalk eating weasel this week. What can I say? It is what it is. Me and Marco, hopefully going to be fat and sassy in time for when those two play each other in the Super Bowl. Speaking of Super Bowl, that is when we will see you next. Thank you again for hanging out with us each and every week here on Bet On It. From myself, Marco, Joe, Ralph, and Andy. Till next week, let's bet on it.